No one noticed the signal at first. That wasn't unusual. Every day, Earth's deep space listening stations captured thousands of strange noises from the universe, pulsars clicking like cosmic clocks, distant stars crackling with radiation, the background hiss of space itself. Most signals were meaningless. But this one was different. At 2:17 a.m., inside a quiet control room at the Arecibo Deep Space Monitoring Network, a narrow spike appeared on a monitor that had been silent for weeks. A single repeating transmission. Slow. Precise. Almost deliberate. The night technician, Daniel Carter, leaned forward in his chair. He had spent 8 years watching screens like this, hoping to see something interesting. Usually, it was just interference. But this signal didn't behave like interference. It repeated every 90 seconds, identical each time. Daniel frowned. "All right, what are you?" he muttered. He ran the usual checks. Satellite interference, negative. Military frequencies, none detected. Earth-based transmissions, no match. The signal wasn't coming from Earth. Daniel tapped a few keys and redirected the antenna array to triangulate the source. The coordinates appeared slowly on his screen. He blinked. The origin wasn't nearby. Not even close. The signal was coming from deep space, far beyond the orbit of Pluto. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. Signals from that distance were incredibly weak. Yet this one was sharp and clean, as if it had been designed to be noticed. Daniel quickly saved the data and pinged the automated alert system. Within minutes, more analysts joined the network remotely. Screens lit up across observatories in California, Spain, and Australia. The signal repeated again. And again. Always identical. Someone suggested the possibility everyone secretly hoped for but rarely said aloud. Could it be artificial? Daniel didn't answer. Instead, he opened the data packet and ran it through a decoding algorithm. The signal wasn't random noise. It had structure. Mathematical structure. Rows of numbers began forming on his screen, grouped patterns that resembled encoded information. But the sequence didn't look like language. It looked more like predictions. Daniel stared at the output. A timestamp appeared at the start of the message. Then a short string of symbols. Then another timestamp. Then another set of symbols. The system translated the first timestamp automatically. 4 o'clock Universal Time coordinated. Daniel checked the clock. It was only 2:23 a.m. The timestamp was nearly 2 hours in the future. He rubbed his eyes. Probably formatting error, he whispered. Still, something bothered him. He saved the sequence and kept decoding. By the time the sun rose over the Caribbean, the research network had fully activated. Dozens of scientists were now studying the signal. The structure was consistent. Timestamp. Data. Timestamp. Data. One of the analysts in Spain spoke first. Maybe it's a schedule. Another disagreed. No, the data changes every cycle. Daniel noticed something strange. The signal had just updated again. He compared the previous transmission with the new one. Most of the message stayed identical. Except for one small section. A new timestamp appeared. 6:30 Universal Time coordinated. Next to it was a short coded sequence. Daniel leaned closer. One of the decoding programs attempted a rough translation using probability mapping. The output appeared on the screen. He froze. The program suggested the symbols might represent text fragments. Not perfect translations, just probability matches. But the phrase forming on the screen made his heart skip. Announcement, economic policy, interest rates. Daniel frowned. That didn't make sense. Then someone in the network chat spoke up. Wait, isn't the Federal Reserve scheduled for a press conference at 6:30 Universal Time coordinated? Daniel opened a news tab. His chest tightened. They were right. A major financial announcement was expected that morning. But the decision hadn't been revealed yet. In fact, according to the news, the final vote inside the Federal Reserve Committee was still happening. Daniel slowly looked back at the signal. The message was already there. 2 hours early. Another analyst laughed nervously. Coincidence? But no one sounded convinced. They waited. At 6:30 Universal Time Coordinated, the press conference began. The chairman stepped to the podium and read the official statement. Within seconds, the analysts started comparing transcripts. Silence filled the network. The statement matched the decoded fragments from the signal. Not approximately. Exactly. For a moment, nobody spoke. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. The signal updated again. A new timestamp appeared. 9:10 Universal Time Coordinated. Next to it was another coded string. Another event that hadn't happened yet. Someone finally said what everyone was thinking. That has to be a trick. Another analyst replied quietly. No satellite can send information about the future. Daniel stared at the signal repeating across his screen. Every 90 seconds. Perfectly calm. Perfectly precise. He opened a private log file and typed a single line. Unknown transmission detected beyond solar system. Then he hesitated. His fingers hovered above the keyboard. Slowly, he added the second sentence. Signal appears to contain information about human decisions before those decisions are made. Across the global research network, the same thought was forming in dozens of minds at once. If the signal truly contained the future, then somewhere, something in the universe already knew what humanity was about to do. And it had decided to tell them. By the time the world woke up, the signal had already spread through every major scientific network on Earth. Officially, it didn't exist. Unofficially, hundreds of researchers were already studying it. The transmission repeated every 90 seconds without fail. Always clean. Always structured. And every cycle contained something new. Another timestamp. Another prediction. Inside a secure analysis room at the International Signal Observatory, analysts stared at the scrolling data on a wall-sized screen. No one spoke for several minutes. The predictions kept coming. At 9:10 Universal Time Coordinated, a shipping accident in the Pacific Ocean occurred exactly as the signal had indicated. At 11:45 Universal Time Coordinated, a sudden stock market shift matched the signal's coded pattern perfectly. By the afternoon, the probability of coincidence had collapsed to nearly zero. This wasn't random. The signal knew. Or at least, it appeared to. Dr. Ethan Walker arrived late to the analysis meeting. He wasn't an astrophysicist or an engineer. His field was far less glamorous. Behavioral systems modeling. In simple terms, he studied how humans made decisions. He walked into the room carrying a tablet and a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. "What did I miss?" he asked. One of the analysts pointed to the screen. "An alien transmission predicting the future." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Sure it is." But when they showed him the data, his smile slowly disappeared. The signal's structure was strange. Each prediction wasn't just a simple statement about an event. It contained layers. Environmental data. Population movement. Financial indicators. Political variables. It looked less like a prophecy and more like a calculation. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. "Run the last 30 predictions again," he said. The system replayed the decoded sequences. At first glance, they looked like short statements about upcoming events. But Ethan noticed something deeper. Every prediction seemed tied to human decisions. A government vote. A financial trade. A corporate announcement. None of the predictions involved natural disasters or random cosmic events. Only choices. Human choices. Ethan slowly set his coffee down. "That's interesting." "What is?" someone asked. Ethan pointed at the screen. "It's not predicting the universe." He paused. "It's predicting us." The room grew quiet. Someone frowned. "What's the difference?" Ethan pulled up another data panel. "Natural events are chaotic. Hard to predict perfectly." He highlighted the list of predictions. "But humans? Humans follow patterns." He began typing commands rapidly. If someone had enough data about our psychology, economics, politics, they could build a behavioral model. The analysts watched as he ran simulations. "Most predictive systems today can forecast trends," Ethan continued. "Election results, stock movements, social behavior." He pointed at the signal. "But this thing, This is doing it at an impossible level of precision. Another transmission arrived. The room watched the new data appear. Timestamp: 1620 Universal Time Coordinated. Prediction string. Ethan frowned. What does that one translate to? A linguistics AI began analyzing the symbols. The translation formed slowly. Personal decision, laboratory test, written note. Ethan tilted his head. That's vague. The analysts shrugged. Maybe we'll understand later. Ethan wasn't satisfied. Something about the structure bothered him. The predictions were becoming more specific. More localized. Almost as if the signal was zooming in. He looked at the timestamp again. 1620 Universal Time Coordinated. That was only 2 hours away. An idea formed in his mind. Let's test something, he said. He grabbed a notebook from the desk. What are you doing? Someone asked. If this thing predicts human decisions, Ethan said, then we should be able to challenge it. He wrote a sentence on the paper. Then he folded the page in half so no one else could see. What did you write? An analyst asked. Ethan shook his head. Doesn't matter. I'm the only one who knows. He placed the folded paper in his pocket. At 1620 Universal Time Coordinated, I'm going to perform the action written on this page. Someone laughed nervously. And if the signal predicts it? Ethan crossed his arms. Then we've got a problem. The room returned to watching the transmission cycles. Every 90 seconds. The signal repeated calmly. As if it had all the time in the universe. Ethan checked the clock. 15:58. The next signal arrived. No change. 16:03. Another cycle. Still no change. 16:07. Another update. Suddenly one of the analysts leaned forward. Wait. Everyone looked at the screen. A new line had appeared in the signal's decoded section. A personal reference tag. Followed by a phrase. The linguistics AI translated the fragment slowly. Subject will remove note from pocket. The room fell silent. Ethan felt his stomach tighten. And place it on the table. The timestamp next to the message read. 1620 Universal Time Coordinated. Ethan slowly reached into his pocket. The folded paper was still there. He hadn't shown anyone what he wrote. No one in the room could possibly know what the note said. Yet the signal had just predicted the exact moment he would take it out. 16 minutes before he did it. One of the analysts whispered, "That's impossible." Ethan stared at the screen. His mind raced through every possible explanation. Hidden cameras. Data leaks. Statistical coincidence. None of them worked. Because the note in his pocket contained something no computer on Earth had ever seen. He had written it just minutes ago. And yet the signal had already calculated what he was about to do. The clock on the wall ticked towards 1620. Ethan's heart was beating faster now. For the first time since the signal was discovered, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. Maybe the transmission wasn't just predicting humanity. Maybe it was predicting him. At exactly 1620 Universal Time Coordinated, the entire room watched Ethan. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of computers and the quiet ticking of the wall clock. Ethan stood motionless for a moment, staring at the screen. The signal had been clear. Subject will remove note from pocket and place it on the table. 16 minutes before it happened. Or before it was supposed to happen. Ethan swallowed. Well, he said quietly, let's find out. Slowly, he reached into his pocket. The folded piece of paper was still there. For a brief moment he considered doing the opposite, keeping the note hidden, refusing to follow the prediction. But something strange was happening inside his mind. The signal hadn't ordered him to take the note out. It had only predicted that he would. And now that he knew the prediction, he wanted to prove it wrong. Ethan pulled the paper from his pocket. Several analysts leaned forward. Instead of placing it on the table, Ethan raised the note in the air. There, he said. Prediction failed. A few people exhaled in relief. But the moment didn't last long. Because the signal updated again. Another transmission arrived. Another timestamp appeared. 1621 Universal Time Coordinated. The decoding system processed the symbols quickly. The translation appeared on the screen. Subject hesitates, displays note. The room went still again. Ethan felt a chill spread through his chest. The message continued. Then places note on table. The timestamp next to that sentence read, 16:23 Universal Time Coordinated. Ethan looked at the clock. 16:21. Someone whispered, it adjusted. Another analyst shook his head slowly. No, it predicted the adjustment. Ethan stared at the paper in his hand. His mind raced. He could refuse. He could hold the note forever if he wanted. The signal couldn't force him to do anything. Right? He stepped back from the table. There, he said. I'm not putting it down. Another 2 minutes passed. The room remained silent. Ethan's arm began to feel tired. The folded paper crinkled slightly between his fingers. Without thinking, he walked forward and placed it on the table. The clock read 16:23 Universal Time Coordinated. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then one of the analysts whispered, check the signal. The transmission repeated again. The prediction line was still there. Exactly as written. Ethan stared at the note on the table as if it had betrayed him. I didn't mean to do that, he muttered. But the truth was more uncomfortable. He had meant to. At least in that moment. Which meant the signal had been correct all along. Word of the experiment spread quickly through the classified research network. Within hours, governments around the world were quietly involved. If the signal could predict individual decisions, then the implications were enormous. Intelligence agencies wanted answers. Military strategists wanted answers. And philosophers probably would have wanted answers too, if they had been invited. By evening, the observatory had turned into a command center. Teams across the world prepared controlled experiments. The goal was simple. Break the signal's predictions. One of the first tests took place in a secure facility in Switzerland. A volunteer sat in front of 2 buttons. Red. Blue. The signal predicted. 18:02 Universal Time Coordinated. Subject presses blue button. At 18:02, the volunteer pressed the red button instead. A few people in the observation room cheered. But their celebration faded quickly. Because the signal had updated 2 minutes earlier. The revised prediction had appeared quietly in the previous transmission cycle. 18:02 Universal Time Coordinated. Subject hesitates, then presses red button. The second test was even more controlled. A random number generator created a sequence no human could predict. A scientist was instructed to write down the number before seeing it. The signal predicted the number. Correctly. Every time. Test after test failed. Each time someone tried to outsmart the prediction, the signal simply updated earlier. Like it was watching the decision process itself. Late that night, Ethan sat alone in the analysis room. The massive screen displayed the endless repeating broadcast. 90 seconds. New data. 90 seconds. New data. He scrolled through hundreds of predictions. A disturbing pattern emerged. Every prediction involved human behavior. Not physics. Not weather. Not cosmic events. Just people. Ethan leaned back in his chair. His brain slowly assembled the pieces. What if it's not predicting the future? He whispered. An analyst nearby looked up. Then what is it doing? Ethan turned the screen toward him. Think about it. He highlighted several data layers hidden in the signal. Economic indicators. Social trends. Psychological response models. Billions of variables. Imagine a system that understands humanity perfectly, Ethan said. A system that knows how we think, how we react, how we choose. The analyst frowned. You're talking about a simulation? Ethan nodded slowly. Yes. He pointed at the signal repeating across the screen. What if this thing isn't predicting our choices? He paused. What if it's calculating them? The room fell silent again. Because if that theory was true, then the signal didn't just know what humanity was about to do. It knew because, somewhere, somehow, humanity had already been solved like an equation. For 3 days, the signal never stopped. Every 90 seconds, the transmission repeated. Timestamp. Prediction. Update. Again and again. Governments across the world had now moved the project into the highest level of secrecy. The public still knew nothing. Officially, the observatories were studying a deep space anomaly. Unofficially, humanity might have just discovered something far more disturbing. Something that seemed to understand them perfectly. Inside the International Signal Observatory, the analysis room had transformed into a war room. Maps covered the walls. Data streams flowed across dozens of screens. At the center of the chaos stood Ethan Walker. He hadn't slept more than a few hours since the first experiment. But tonight, they weren't studying predictions. They were studying the signal itself. "Run the trajectory again," Ethan said. An orbital analyst typed rapidly. The massive radio array had been repositioned to measure the signal's exact direction. A glowing line appeared across a star map. It pointed far beyond the solar system. Farther than any human spacecraft had ever traveled. "Distance estimate?" Ethan asked. The analyst frowned. "Still calculating." Another screen lit up as additional telescopes joined the measurement. The line narrowed. The coordinates stabilized. Finally, the computer produced a result. The room went quiet. Source estimated at 1,200 light-years from Earth. Someone let out a low whistle. "That's not exactly next door." Ethan stared at the map. If the signal came from that distance. He paused. Then it took 1,200 years to reach us. Which meant something obvious and terrifying. The message had been sent more than a millennium ago. Long before modern technology. Long before radio. Long before humanity had even begun thinking about contacting alien civilizations. Ethan leaned closer to the screen. "Play the earliest transmissions we recorded." The system replayed the first cycles of the signal. Predictions scrolled across the display. Financial decisions. Political votes. Scientific discoveries. Events that would happen in the next few hours or days. All predicted by a message that had left its origin 12 centuries ago. "That's impossible," someone whispered. Ethan didn't respond. Instead, he opened a deeper data layer within the signal. "Zoom in on the non-prediction segments," he said. Another analyst nodded. "There's a huge amount of background data in the transmission." "Show me." The screen filled with dense streams of encoded information. At first glance it looked chaotic. But as decoding programs began working, patterns slowly emerged. Language models. Behavioral maps. Historical data structures. Psychological profiles. The room grew quieter with each passing minute. One of the anthropologists spoke first. "These are cultural models." Another analyst zoomed in further. "Wait, look at this." The system translated a section into readable fragments. Tribal conflict probability. Agricultural development patterns. Industrial expansion. Ethan's eyes widened. The database wasn't about the future. It was about the past. Human past. Thousands of years of it. Another section decoded. Population migration. Linguistic evolution. Technological progression. One of the scientists whispered, "This is a history archive." But Ethan slowly shook his head. "No." He pointed at another layer. It was even larger. Deeper. More complex. Decision modeling. Cognitive response patterns. Social behavior simulations. Ethan's voice was quiet now. "This isn't just history." He looked around the room. "It's a complete model of humanity." Someone asked the question no one wanted to ask. How could anyone build something like that? Ethan didn't answer immediately. He stared at the star map again. A signal sent 1,200 years ago. Containing a complete simulation of human behavior. Detailed enough to predict individual choices. Even private ones. The implications were terrifying. Because if someone had built that model, they must have studied humanity. Extensively. Carefully. For a very long time. But 1,200 years ago, humans barely understood electricity. Which meant only one thing. Whoever created the signal had studied humanity before the message was sent. Before modern civilization. Before the scientific revolution. Before most of recorded history. Another decoding alert appeared on the screen. New data layer detected. Ethan turned quickly. Open it. The system began translating the section. This part of the message was different. Instead of predictions or models, it contained structured statements. Almost like instructions. Or observations. The first translated fragment appeared. Species designated, human. Another line followed. Behavioral complexity confirmed. Then a third line. Prediction model stable. Ethan felt a strange chill. Scroll further. More fragments appeared. Monitoring complete. Simulation accuracy threshold achieved. Someone whispered, monitoring. Another line appeared. Final message prepared. The room fell silent. Ethan stared at the decoded words. Because suddenly the signal's purpose became much clearer. This wasn't just a random broadcast. It wasn't even a greeting. It was a report. A report written by something that had been studying humanity for thousands of years. And had finally finished its work. Another line appeared in the translation. Short. Simple. And far more unsettling than the rest. Human decision patterns fully mapped. Ethan looked around the room. No one spoke. Because the meaning was obvious now. Somewhere in the distant past, an unknown intelligence had watched humanity grow. Studied every behavior. Analyzed every decision. And eventually built a perfect model of how humans think. A model so precise it could predict humanity's future like clockwork. Then, 1200 years ago, they sent the results to Earth. The signal repeated again. Another prediction appeared. Another human decision calculated. But Ethan barely noticed anymore. Because a far more disturbing question had just entered his mind. If the signal was only a report, then who had it been reporting to? The signal continued. Every 90 seconds. Just like it had since the moment humanity first noticed it. Prediction. Timestamp. Update. But something about the newest transmissions was different. The predictions were getting shorter. At first, no one noticed. The research teams were too busy analyzing the massive historical archive hidden inside the signal. But Ethan Walker saw the pattern immediately. He was sitting alone in the observatory's main control room when the realization hit him. The predictions used to describe complex events. Government decisions. Financial markets. Scientific breakthroughs. Now they were becoming simpler. Smaller. More personal. Ethan scrolled through the last 100 transmissions. The trend was obvious. The signal wasn't zooming out anymore. It was zooming in. Closer and closer to individual human actions. A scientist adjusting a monitor. A technician choosing coffee instead of tea. A security guard deciding to check a hallway 2 minutes early. Tiny choices. Insignificant choices. But every single one predicted perfectly. Ethan leaned back in his chair. That's not right, he whispered. Across the room, another analyst looked up. What isn't? Ethan turned the monitor toward him. Look at the timestamps. The analyst studied the screen. The earlier predictions had been hours ahead. Sometimes days. Now they were shrinking. 30 minutes ahead. Then 20. Then 10. The newest prediction was only 2 minutes in the future. Why would it do that? The analyst asked. Ethan didn't answer immediately. Because the answer was beginning to form in his mind. The signal wasn't losing accuracy. It was reaching the edge of its model. And something else was happening too. The massive data layers hidden in the broadcast were slowly ending. The archive of human psychology. The simulations. The behavioral models. All of it had been transmitted piece by piece over the past several days. Like a library being unpacked. Now that library was almost finished. Which meant the signal's original purpose was nearly complete. Another transmission arrived. 90 seconds. New data. The screen updated. Prediction timestamp. 21:44 Universal Time Coordinated. Translation. Observer will stand. Ethan glanced at the clock. 21:42. Without thinking, he stood up. 2 minutes later the timestamp passed. The signal was correct again. But something strange happened afterward. The next cycle arrived. And for the first time since the discovery, there was no prediction. Instead, a new section appeared. A different structure. Different symbols. Ethan leaned forward. Translate that. The system began decoding. The room slowly filled as more researchers noticed the change. Everyone watched the screen. The translation appeared word by word. Prediction window approaching limit. No one spoke. Another line appeared. Model accuracy degrading. Someone whispered, "What does that mean?" Ethan's eyes stayed locked on the screen. Another line translated. Human variables diverging. Then the final section began decoding. The symbols were simpler than the rest of the message. Almost like they were meant to be understood easily. The translation completed. A single sentence appeared across the screen. If you are reading this, you have reached the point where prediction is no longer possible. Silence filled the room. Ethan felt a strange sensation in his chest. 4 days, the signal had predicted every human decision with terrifying accuracy. Every thought. Every action. Every choice. But now the system that had simulated humanity perfectly was admitting something impossible. It could no longer see the future. Another transmission cycle passed. 90 seconds. The signal repeated again. But the prediction section was empty. No timestamps. No calculations. No future events. Only the final message. The same sentence repeating endlessly. Ethan slowly sat down. "Why now?" someone asked quietly. Ethan looked at the massive data archive they had decoded. The answer was hidden inside it. The alien model had been incredibly powerful. But it had one limitation. It relied on historical patterns. Human psychology. Cultural evolution. All the things that made human behavior predictable. But something had changed. The moment humanity discovered the signal, those patterns began breaking. People started making decisions specifically to challenge the predictions. Governments changed plans. Scientists altered experiments. Even random individuals across the research network began acting differently simply because they knew the signal was watching. Humanity had introduced something the model could not account for. Awareness. And awareness had shattered the simulation. Ethan looked back at the star map. The origin of the signal still glowed faintly in the distance. A star system 1,200 light-years away. Whoever had sent the transmission had studied humanity for thousands of years. They had built a perfect prediction engine. And for most of human history, it had worked. But now something new had happened. For the first time since the signal began broadcasting, humanity had become unpredictable. The screen flickered softly as the message repeated again. If you are reading this, you have reached the point where prediction is no longer possible. Ethan stared at the sentence. Then a strange thought crossed his mind. Somewhere out there, the beings who built the model might still exist. And if they were still watching Earth, then right now, for the first time in thousands of years, they were seeing something completely new. A species whose future even they could no longer calculate.